Thank you, Susan and Namaya. I'll now talk for a few minutes about the Vietnamese victims of Agent Orange. As Namaya mentioned in his excellent presentation, an estimated 3 million Vietnamese have been affected by their exposures to various poisons during and after the war, primarily the dioxin contamination in 2,4,5-T, but also other herbicides themselves, which are known to cause health hazards. While most of the herbicides were sprayed on forests, some of it was formulated to destroy food sources such as rice, which was a clear war crime at the time. Most of those 3 million Vietnamese victims were adults during the war, and some number of them have likely died due to their illnesses brought on by their exposure. This gentleman had been a National Liberation Front guerrilla during the war who I met in 2008. If he had been unable to get proper medical care for these tumors, I suspect he's no longer alive. These are photos of a man with very severe chloracne, a clear result of acute exposure to dioxin. These two men are only two examples of the millions of other adults whose health has been affected or destroyed by their exposure to herbicides, dioxin, arsenic, white phosphorus, malathion, etc. during and after the war. Many of them have already died, and many are still alive, suffering with the diseases that they carry for many decades. They have survived the brutality of that war only to have their bodies fail them afterwards. But what is especially heartbreaking is that an estimated 10 to 15% of the living victims are children and young adults born years or decades after the war due to their parents' exposure to dioxin either during the war or after, or to their own exposure in many locations where it lingers 50 years after the spraying was halted. These are a few of the photos I have of the children with what appear to be Agent Orange related deformities and disabilities. I took about half during my 5 trips to Vietnam since 2008, and I have specific stories about many of these children. The other half are from the other organizations and people, such as the Vietnam Association of Victims of Agent Orange. These are children whose birth defects range from severe to devastating. Some of these children will never learn to speak, never learn to communicate, or to be able to physically care for themselves. Others, their problems are they can be socialized, they can be taught to read perhaps, they can be taught to speak, they can be taught a vocation, but there's this huge range of disabilities related to Agent Orange victims. Also, the photos that we've seen so far are of children that are in institutions, what the Vietnamese call peace villages, or they're in orphanages that are either run by Catholic orders or Buddhist orders or community groups where they have gathered these children either because they've been abandoned or because they just would thrive better in a community where they are loved and cared for by knowledgeable and caring nurses and doctors. On the other hand, throughout the countryside, there are still tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps, of these children who are born to families that don't have a place to put them. And so this village of Duc Pho, these are children who were born into the families of these former farmers and former fighters, perhaps both, who have very severe disabilities. And if you consider in farming communities where a farming family, everybody is expected to contribute to the way a farm is run. And if one of the children or one of the children or one of the parents are severely disabled because of their illnesses, someone has to take care of them. Some of these children have to be cared for 24/7. So if one of the parents, for example, is taken out of the rice fields, that means there's a lot less work that happens in that family. And a child who would normally be expected as a young child to take care of the chickens, and as an older child, the pigs, and as an older child, the water buffalo, and as an even older child, perhaps working in the fields, that child not only cannot do that, but it takes another person out of the family to care for them. And it drives farming families into poverty, extreme poverty. That the Vietnamese will provide a small stipend for to stave off starvation, but it does not mean that that family can thrive. And that's this condition occurs throughout Vietnam with these children who are severely disabled. Even in the cities, if there's not a peace village there, there's not daycare for these disabled children, then one of the parents has to stay home and take care of them. That's quite debilitating. One of these photos is of a doctor, um, a woman doctor. Her husband is also a doctor. She had to give up her medical practice, simply right there, simply because um, there was nobody to take care of their child who was severely disabled. Some of these children will die very early, as did this child of Mr. Duan Ton Tat, a farmer I met near Hanoi in 2010. He had been drafted in the North Vietnamese army and gone south at his country's call, patriot to the end, to liberate the South. After the war, he returned to farming and he got married. His wife gave birth to Duan Thi Dam, who had terrible skin lesions, deformities, and developmental issues. I was taken to meet with them, but she had died of an infection 3 weeks before. He was so sad, and he cried when he talked about losing his only child. So, but we need to be careful not to write off any of these children. Near Tam Key, I visited this family, and this child who was lying quietly on the floor when we came in, his body went into these spasms because of the excitement. He could not control his body, and I was afraid that his muscles were going to break him. He was so out, his body was so out of control. Well, a few moments later, we went into the next room and sat down and started talking to his parents. And after a while, these muscle spasms quieted down, and he worked his way around, and he was watching us, looking from one of us to the other one, to the other one, to the other one, to the other one. And I suddenly realized that there was a human being inside that horribly deformed body with this cerebral palsy that just controlled everything, and that he might be a brilliant young man. He just was unable to control his body. Another example is this girl. She was born in a village near Ho Chi Minh City to a mother who had been exposed to to dioxin 20 years after the end of the war. She was born missing both legs and one hand. However, she was lucky on 2 counts. She had her mind, and she was raised in a loving and supporting environment in Tzu Hospital in Saigon. She has completed college with a degree in computer science, and she's working in Saigon as a statistician. And at 33, she has her own apartment and her own motorcycle, and she has friends and a community. She speaks English and is just wonderful. In fact, Tran Thi Huan, this young lady, was the only Agent Orange victim to ever testify at a hearing in Congress on Agent Orange in 2008. And she's just an extraordinary person. Vietnam has 28 identified hotspots, and it is likely there are a few others. The 3 major ones, however, are former air bases where Agent Orange was sprayed: Da Nang, Phuket, and Bien Hoa. In 2008, the United States finally stepped up and helped the Vietnamese remediate the problem at the Da Nang airport. This map of this area here, which was heavily contaminated, and this area here, which was also heavily contaminated, with severe dioxin across the washdown area, the storage area, and the drainage area in the Sen Lake, that then drained through the village, through the neighborhood, into the bay to the north. But by 2018, the U.S. spent $150 million and heated 94,000 square meters of soil in this containment facility, this 18-meter high containment facility where the soil was put in and heated to 335 degrees centigrade to bring the contamination levels down from a few samples that were as high as 360 parts per trillion to less than 1,000 parts per trillion. And that soil was later used to fill these lakes so that the um, runways could be extended further. The second one, Phuket, is much, much smaller. 8,500 cubic meters of soil was put into this landfill and capped in 2012, and no further action is contemplated. The third one, however, Bien Hoa, is probably 3 to 4 times bigger than the one in Da Nang. This is just outside of Saigon. There were huge spills here, and some of the contamination has been able to leach out into the neighborhoods. The U.S. has assisted the Vietnamese in a couple of temporary measures called corralling and capping, or creating sedimentation ponds, and the samples running as high as 262,000 parts per trillion for soil will have to be remediated. The United States has pledged $300 million. That's $30 million a year for 10 years. Japan, Korea, and the Vietnamese government will also work primarily in the neighborhoods around the airbase there. And it's certain that the cost will not be $300 million. It's going to be $500 million, or maybe as much as $1 billion. And it's up to us to make sure the U.S. Continues with that. Very briefly about the Victims of Agent Orange Relief Act in 2019. It has 5 elements. Clean up the dioxin in Vietnam. That's Bien Hoa and the other one, uncharacterized hotspots. Assist the public health system in Vietnam to assist the Vietnamese victims of Agent Orange. Provide assistance to the affected children and grandchildren of Vietnam veterans. Heather will talk about that next. Provide assistance to affected Vietnamese Americans, basically a public health study of the Vietnamese American population to see what effects they might have of Agent Orange, and conduct research studies recommended by the IOM in their biennial Veterans and Agent Orange updates, something the VA has refused to do for decades. I think that's it. Thank you very, very much.